sources. So when you hear about this concept of food as medicine, I want you to just
in progress.
Wir gucken, ob ihr alles anderes Kamera, Mikrofon, aber wir werden.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Sanam Naragyan-Androlini. I'm the founder and CEO of the International Civil Society Action Network, ICANN, and the director of the Center for Women, Peace and Security at the LSE. I was waiting to get 100 people on online before I started, so here we are at the 100 person mark. Welcome to this discussion on feminist solutions for impactful financing for peace building. It is an event to, first of all, to enable us to have the discussions on effective financing, but it's also a moment to be able to highlight to you a paper that is about to be made public with the title, which I like very much, which is Fund Us Like You Want Us to Win. And it's really about the body of evidence and experience that is coming from the ground up from women's peacebuilding organizations in terms of what is effective financing for peace work. I'm not going to spend a lot of time giving the context. I want to first thank our co-hosts and others who have enabled this event. So the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders, Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict, that's GPAC, Kavina Till Kavina, UN Women, of course, the Permanent Missions of Ireland and Mexico, as well as, of course, ICANN, and then to Wilf and Madre for also being supportive of the paper, and to the Highland Center for their support in enabling this event and the research in the paper that went with it. As I said, I'm not going to spend a lot of time giving the context because I think everybody who's here kind of knows the story, and I'll just put it this way to be quite frank with you all. We seem to have a situation where there's an inverse correlation between what we say as a global community, and especially our governments and our philanthropic community, and what we're actually doing. So we say that peace is important, and yet the funding for peace building remains woefully inadequate. And we see that right now in cases like Afghanistan and elsewhere in terms of really what money is being made available. We say that women peace builders are important and that we care about the WPS agenda and the work of women's organizations on the ground in conflict affected countries. And yet they remain, again, pitifully funded. And I say that pitifully because when you think about the scope of work and issues that they're dealing with, they receive, I think the last count or assessment that was done was just about 0.2% of the ODA that goes to fragile contexts, which is itself not a huge amount. So it's still a big problem. We know, of course, that there are certain governments that have been trying to address this and doing it in every way possible. And here I certainly thank Canada and Norway and others for their creativity in trying to address these things. But it really needs a more significant and comprehensive approach. So the paper and the discussions that we have here are were prepared in advance of the 2022 high-level discussions on peacebuilding financing that's coming in, and I hope that really this will inform those discussions and genuinely integrate the lens of gender-responsive feminist approaches to peacebuilding into the broader peacebuilding discussions. And I'll just for those who are not aware. Just to give an example of why we say that women's peacebuilding work is so critical. When COVID hit us, the people that were the first ones to respond on the ground in fragile contexts when the international community and others completely disappeared were local women peacebuilders. And one of their key advantages was that because they were peacebuilders, they were trusted. So in an environment where the messenger was so key to the messaging around hygiene and health and vaccines and everything else, that trust that peacebuilders had was absolutely critical. So just as a reminder of how important the work is and the multifaceted nature of the work that peacebuilders do, and we'll hear more of that coming in. we will have some opening remarks and then moving on to a roundtable discussion. So with that, I'm going to hand over to the first comments, which is from our colleague Anita Bhatia, the Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Executive Director of UN Women. Hi, Anita, long time no see. Lovely to see you. The floor is yours, and you have a total of 5 minutes, my friend.
Okay, well, thank you, dear Sanam. It's great to see you and to see everybody else as well. And on behalf of UN Women, let me just say how happy we are to be able to co-sponsor this event and to co-host this with so many of you who are here today, the Global Network of Women Peacebuilders, the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict, Kavina Till Kavina, the ICANN, of course, and of course, special thanks to the permanent missions of Mexico and Ireland for this really important discussion that we're going to have today. Let me just say a few things to add on to what you've already said, Sanam, and that is UN Women, along with all of you, has been highlighting for a long time that there has been persistent underinvestment in gender-responsive peace building. And the question is, going into the high-level discussions next year, what is really going to change? The data is known, the problem is known, the diagnostics are done. So I think we need to shift the dialogue away from a general discussion of the fact that there is underinvestment to start to talk about not just how much financing is needed, but what kind of financing is needed. And here I think it's really important for us to look at and be inspired perhaps by discussions in other areas. So if we look at what's happening in COP26, and if we look at how the discussion on climate financing has changed, the climate finance discussion has become a discussion about how do you use official grant money to leverage private investment into climate. And that's the shift that I think needs to happen on gender financing, where we now need to start thinking about ODA as catalytic investment that can also drive private financing towards common goals, in this case, on peace building, because peace building brings benefits for societies, for countries. It is in the interest of all peoples in the world to have more inclusive and peaceful societies with women at the center of that. So in order to do that, I would like to suggest that the discussion focus not just on the well-known issues of underinvestment, which of course we are trying to address through things like the Compact for Women, Peace and Security, which was launched at Generation Equality, but also really recognize first and foremost that finance is principally a male-dominated industry. And for us to change the discourse, we need women to be at the table as decision makers and in leadership positions, driving the decisions that determine how finance, whether it's public finance or private finance, gets allocated to strategic priorities. And to do that, we need to be thinking outside the box, because just pure grant funding is not going to be able to solve these problems. So we really do need to be thinking about blended finance models, about public-private partnerships, and about creating conditions for investment in women peace building that can actually unleash people's and investor interest in environment, social, and governance issues to drive major and exponentially different levels of funding to women peace building. I want to wish you all a really excellent discussion and to say that we are really looking forward to working with all of you in the run-up to next year's high-level meeting on financing for peace building, which is really not that far away. When you think about it, it's only about 6 months away. So I do hope that this discussion, along with the paper that you mentioned, Sanam, will help to make a substantive shift. One would have thought that the experience of Afghanistan would be a wake-up call and would lead to very different discussions and allocations of aid already. But as you rightly pointed out, Sanam, we have not yet seen that happen. So what is going to be the lever that actually brings about this exponential change that I think we all want to see? I think it is going to have to learn from other instances like climate and see how can we adapt some of the lessons of what worked there into the gender finance space. But to do that, again, and I repeat this because this has become so clear to me that things are not going to change unless we have women at the table. And I remember, Sanam, the last panel that you and I were on together, you said something which really stayed with me, which was, enough talking about training the women, let's train the men. And so, with that same spirit, I would say enough talking about how to finance women. Let's get women at the table to make sure that they're making the decisions that determine their futures and the futures of their countries. Thank you so much, and hope you have a great discussion.
Thank you, Anita. And I will copyright that statement and sell it on a T-shirt and give the money to women peace builders. I think maybe that's the way we have to go to privatize our own thought leadership and all this stuff as well. But thank you so much. It's great to have you, and look forward to actually continuing these conversations with you at the high level event and as part of the main event, not a side event, because I think that's one of the key things that we need, is to be integrated into the main issues, no longer sidelined. So thank you so much. Great to see you. And I'm sure we have others. With that, I'm going to hand over the floor to my colleague, Mavic Cabrera-Beleza. Mavic, founder of the Global Network for Women Peace Builders. And of course, on behalf of the, speaking here on behalf of civil society co-sponsors and a partner in writing up the paper. Mavic, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanam. Excellencies, fellow civil society activists, friends, and colleagues, I am pleased to address you on behalf of the civil society co-organizers of this event, the Global Network of Women Peace Builders, Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict, International Civil Society Action Network, and FINA-TIFINA. I want to recognize and thank UN Women and our member states co-sponsors, Ireland and Mexico, for their support to this event, but more especially on this critical issue, the feminist financing for peace building. The international community has reportedly recognized that adequate, predictable, and sustained financing for diverse women peace builders is a prerequisite to sustaining peace and preventing conflict. However, we all know that such funding is currently extremely scarce. In its current form, the peace-building financing model is not fit for purpose of peace building and sustaining inclusive peace. It is not geared towards addressing the priorities of women peace builders who know their communities and their needs best. We are aware of what is needed. We hear this from local women peace builders: more adequate, predictable, and sustained financing for diverse women. We've also discussed this countless times. The question is, how can it be done? To answer this critical question, the Global Network of Women Peace Builders, GPAC, ICANN, and FINA-TIFINA, together with MADRE and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, developed a background paper on feminist solutions for more impactful financing for peace building. As we say, fund us like you want us to win. We hope that the background paper will inform the discussions during the high-level political meeting on peace building financing next year. In the background paper, we identify 6 structural barriers faced by diverse women peace builders in accessing funds to support their work. Number 1, inadequate overall amount of funding for peace building and the competing priorities, which deprioritizes peace building, as many of us have seen during this COVID-19 pandemic. Number 2, from the small overall amount, the scarcity of funds that go directly to women peace builders. I look at it as a scarcity within a scarcity, wherein women peace builders only get the loose change. Number 3, the exclusion of women peace builders from decision-making on financing priorities. Number 4, the persistent presumption of incapacity and risk when funding women peace builders. The problem I see here is that donors have not treated risk in a logical way that allows for a deep understanding and appreciation of the transformative and positive changes that women peace builders bring. Do you know what the real risk is? The real risk is when women peace builders are not funded. We risk continuing women's exclusion and discrimination, which are key drivers of conflict. Number 5, the focus on short-term output rather than impact-driven financing models. And number 6, the lack of rapidly accessible and flexible funding for the protection of women peace builders. These barriers are not new, as Anita and Sanam also mentioned. We already sound like a broken record as we've repeated them for years, but never mind. I want us to look at how we can dismantle these barriers through good practices and useful models of inclusive funding based on the principle of trust and genuine partnerships. Here are some examples: the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund, ICANN's Innovative Peace Fund, GPAC's Youth by Youth Small Grants, and the Global Network of Women Peace Builders Seed Fund for Women's Economic Empowerment in Conflict and Crisis. Now, these examples need to be amplified, strengthened, and replicated. I also want to share that feminist intermediary organizations such as MADRE and Fina Tefina have developed principles and guidance for trust-based, inclusive, and impact-oriented funding. It is essential that the models of inclusive funding are complemented with transformative change in how donors operate. In the background paper we are launching today, we provide examples of how this can be done. For instance, donors could review an ease fund eligibility application and reporting requirements. They can also provide more funds directly to grassroots women-led organizations through their embassies, something that has actually been done in many cases. And when choosing intermediaries, donors should choose organizations best positioned to reach frontline peace builders and have an established track record of building trust-based relationships. Donors should also include diverse women on funding boards and committees, as done by the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. And finally, the Global Network of Women Peace Builders advocates for that in every peace building project, there must be a dedicated, flexible line allocated to women peace builder protection needs. These are just some of the few examples of concrete actions that could help ensure that financing for peace building is fit for purpose. So we know what needs to be done. The models of ensuring funding for women peace builders are out there. The recommendations to donors are explicit. There is no excuse to ignore them. It is now time to galvanize behind them and make inclusive and sustainable peace a reality. It is our hope this meeting contributes towards that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mavic. With that, I'm going to open up the floor for our discussions. And the format is going to be relatively informal. We'll have 3 of our colleagues from the peacebuilding community speaking, and then we'll have some points from our colleagues in our permanent missions, and then others, please either put your hand up or put questions in the chat box, and we'll get around them. So please feel as interactive as possible, and I hope that this will be useful. Just to summarize what we've heard so far, we heard from Anita Bhatia that we need to look at private public financing, and I will actually ask our government colleagues to help us a little bit to think through that moving forward. But for now, I'm going to hand the floor over to my colleague and friend. Is she here? Is Abir with us?
Yes, I'm with you.
Okay, perfect. Abir Haji Ibrahim, co-founder and executive director of Mobadoru in Syria. It's lovely to hear your voice, Abir. Abir, question for you. We seem to have trouble funding women locally and at the same time ensuring that they have a voice in high-level participation in related decision-making processes. what harm is done when we either just put women in decision-making without the requisite support and funding, or when we say, okay, here's a little bit of money to do your work locally, but actually exclude them or keep them in the sidelines or the margins of decision-making. So what harm is done there? And then what, if any, are good practices that you could share with us in terms of supporting women's peace-building efforts based on your now many, over a decade of experience in the Syrian conflict context, which is so complicated. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Salam. Thank you, everyone. I'm so happy to be on board with all these wonderful ladies and gentlemen. Actually, I'm going to speak a little bit about our experience, how it was successful and why it was successful. I do remember that at the beginning of the Syria crisis, it was like a great chaos, and there was so many people who wanted to fund so many Syrian organizations, but rarely the ones who approached women-led organizations. The main focus was at the beginning of the revolution or a crisis, uprising, whatever it take as a title. It was headed directly for men-led organizations who were able to have like a opposition point of view. At that time, I do remember that the only funding opportunities came from international women-led organizations. And that was very, very weird for us. The big funding, which helped us to continue and to start and to build our peace-building networks, it came from SIDA, where also the program manager was like leading us on that period. I do remember in that time, Sanam, when you approaches us and you told us, look, ladies, if you are going to have this kind of funding, only work locally only without your voice getting out to international level, it will affect your work later on. And believe me, trust me, men will take decisions against the great work that you are doing on the ground. For us, it wasn't the case at that time. You know that it was the beginning. It was very difficult for us to move from the local interventions and respond, the huge responsibility we felt, and the huge changes in the Syrian context into a violent conflict. For us, it didn't come to our mind, why the hell I'm going to be on international platform and why my voices are important. Then suddenly we noticed that everything we are doing on a local level is not taking into consideration in any kind of decisions taking in at the Office of Special Envoy's tables. So we were disconnected from these talks, and we were like looking at the TV, watching the news as if the case wasn't our case, as if they are not talking with our eyes and our hearts, our ambitions, our vision, our future that we are looking for. So that was one of the obstacles. Vice versa, I noticed also on the other hand that the Women Advisory Board members at the Geneva talks, they have a very good elite way of thinking. They have a very good wide experience in gender. 13 years ago, they are a very high skilled, experienced woman, but on the other hand, they don't have enough funding. So they can reflect all these experiences that they've got on the ground. You feel in a way or another that they are losing the touch with what's happening on the local level, and what they are bringing to the negotiation table is an elite point of view more than an inclusive point of view. So there was always this argument, why these people, they don't get funded for their local action projects or for the local projects. So in both cases, we noticed that it has to be on a parallel. You have to be secured in funding, and at the same time, you have to be engaged in international. Other than that, you will lose the money in putting so many local initiatives, but at the end, a peace agreement will come against all the peace efforts that you did and you established with local communities. And there will be another circle of conflict between what is taking against the country and what the real local community needs. This is one. the second and my last intervention, that I feel so, if I did a comparison chart with all the fundings on the Syria case, you feel so frustrated that there's a huge amount of money were given and provided for men-led organizations because they are men, they have better work in budget as an assumption because it is not the truth. And they can do a lot of funding and sub-grants to another woman organization. So you cannot find a big hub of women-led organization who could sub-grants another woman. This is the only case that I saw. It was with ICANN, that they are a women-led organization and they do funding for another woman-led. And this is completely different ways of funding. When men fund women peace builders, it's not the same like the women peace builders find funding opportunity for the local women peace building. For that reason, it was for us so weird to see that there is a certain compliance, a certain regulation, certain issues are being asked from the local woman peace builder without even knowing what does it mean to be a woman peace builder by the man. So, and who says that women cannot do budgeting and cannot control? In the Middle East, if you go inside each house, you will see that most of the houses have been led economically by women. And she's responsible for most of the budgeting of the house. Now, why she cannot do that on a wider range? Who says that? So we need to break this assumption that women cannot do financing. For that reason, a man needs to supervise and sub-grant her in her work, in her peace building work. We need to break the issue that the women peace builders have only two ways to work, either to be in international platform or locally engaged. No, they need to be locally engaged, globally connected all the time, in all tracks, in all ways, especially when it comes to forming constitution or putting together a peace agreement. And we need also to build the women-led organization institutional growth. This is our responsibility. It's not like asking others to do it. We need to come together as a women-led organization to build our institution and our policies, our procedures in the way which will look equal to the other organization, whether it's men-led or like women-led. Thank you, Sana.
Thank you, Abir, and thank you for reminding us that there is a huge disconnect also between those who are taking on the responsibility to protect on the ground. And I think Syria is not alone in terms of how women have been the holders of that responsibility. And then the disconnect between those who are sitting at the power tables where decisions are being made that don't necessarily take into consideration the needs of people on the ground. And then we wonder why our peace processes are failing so much. So there's that gap, and that gap again becomes very much a gap between where women peace builders are and where the international community's eyes and ears seem to be. But thank you for those remarks. I'm going to move on to our next speaker from Cameroon, Justine Kumche, the Executive Director of Women in Alternative Action, WAA. Justine, are you with us? Just
yes,
checking.
I am.
Yes, you are fantastic. Okay, lovely. I can see beautiful green behind you and a lovely outfit. Justine, what are the examples of donorship models that did not work for you? Let's talk about the bad stuff. And what support do you need as a member of civil society? What are the modalities that work for you and why? What's the difference? So the floor is yours for 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon to you all. It is a pleasure and honor to join you today from Yaoundé, Cameroon. My name is Justine Kwachukumche, and I am the Executive Director of Women in Alternative Action, one of Cameroon's leading NGOs that is promoting peace and preventing conflict. We primarily focus on empowering women and youth and promoting human rights, especially in the 2 English-speaking regions of Cameroon, ridden by conflict since 2016. I want to praise this concerted initiative that provides concrete solutions for more impactful financing of local women-led peace building. It is timely and crucial we address this issue to ensure sustainable peace locally, nationally, and globally. I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute my experience. First, I will start by focusing on the main challenge my organization has been facing in securing funding. Then I will share some of the best practices that have proven instrumental in supporting our efforts in securing funding. And finally, I will wrap up by sharing 3 brief recommendations. My experience shows that women's actions could be more impactful if existing funding barriers are mitigated. The main barrier has to do with the complexity and time-consuming process to not only access funding, but also manage it. Oftentimes, the language used by donors in their planning or reporting guidelines is too technical, making it difficult to analyze and meaningfully respond. Eligibility criteria are also too high for many organizations to meet. For instance, the requirement to showcase a strong track record is unrealistic, especially for small or new organizations, despite their potential to effect change on the ground. Another unrealistic requirement relates to the limited time frame during which we are expected to yield impact, usually for close to 1 to 2 years. We know it takes much longer for peace building efforts to bring about change, especially when the context is changing all the time, requiring us to continuously adapt our projects. It is because of this barrier that we sometimes have to partner with intermediary organizations to easily access and manage funding from donors. While not ideal, this approach could be beneficial for us if the partnership is based on equal footing. These are the best practices I want to share with you now. To begin with, in times of crisis and eruption of violence, there is no time for fundraising. After the presidential elections in Cameroon in 2018, GPAC's Crisis Fund enabled us to act swiftly and effectively contribute to reduce and prevent the imminent electoral violence. In 2020 and 2021, my organization has been partnering with GPAC on a project funded by the German Federal Foreign Office, IFA-Civic. GPAC is the intermediary for this project. From the design phase, we had a transition strategy in mind, which was shared with the donor. Based on this strategy, we jointly identified which capacities would have to be strengthened for WA Cameroon to take the lead after GPAC's phase would have, intermediary role would have phased out. One of such capacities included aligning our local impact to global work frameworks such as Women, Peace and Security and the SDGs. But most importantly, GPAC provides us support to engage directly with other donors, such as the European Union, with whom we are currently working on a project proposal. And this time, my organization is the lead. To conclude, I would like to put forward 3 recommendations. First, application and reporting processes should be made simpler and less complex so that more local organizations can apply. This is even more relevant for emergency and crisis funds. Second, to yield more impactful results on the ground, we need long-term funding, ideally between 3 to 5 years. Finally, addressing all these challenges is possible if the donors assume mutually beneficial partnership with local peace builders. And this includes consulting with us to ensure that local priorities and needs are reflected in funding opportunities. For truly impactful financing, our voices should be taken into account. we must be consulted on the best way forward for impactful results. We are happy to be part of the feminist solution. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Justine, and thank you again for reminding us about the complexity of reporting and application processes while you're dealing with crisis, while you're living in the midst of a crisis. And I think that, again, I want to bring back to the COVID era where so many donors themselves were suddenly hit with a crisis and realized how complex it can be to try and juggle and manage everything. So to be living in the midst of crisis and having to bear the burdens is extraordinary. And I think we do have some good practices that have emerged. I'm going to move on to our next speaker, who is my dear friend and colleague, Robin Robumbe from Uganda, and from the founder of the Coalition for Action 1325. Robina, you've been in this work for many, many years. You've seen many iterations and changes and developments going all the way back to before 1325 even existed. What are good practices? What are the gaps in peacebuilding funding for to meet women peacebuilders' needs? And also in terms of financing for WPS NAPs, the Women Peace Security National Action Plans, what are you seeing in terms of good practices or ongoing bad practices in the context of Uganda? The floor is yours. Oops, you're on mute. Can you unmute? Yeah.
Lovely to see you, Sanam. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning. I'm really happy to be here. I work with the Coalition for Action on 1325, which is an alliance of women's peace-building organizations. I'm sorry there is noise outside because I'm in a hotel. We have our NAP reflection meeting. So I just jumped out of the meeting for that. The alliance is made up of very many women's organizations. We are now 62 organizations. Some are national level, others are Pan-African, a few are international, like Care Uganda, like World Vision. But the majority of them are really very small women's organizations doing very important work on the ground, in villages, in communities that are affected by all forms of conflict. I'll first begin by the good practices that we have experienced. And first I'll tell you that the women of Uganda were actually involved in doing peace building work to counter insurgencies and rebel activities long before 1325 came, engaging with rebels directly, marching to participate in peace talks, even when we were not on delegations. So we've been doing this work often without any money. And sometimes money came, sometimes it didn't, but it really doesn't stop women from doing the work they do because we believe in what we do. We are trusted by our communities. They call on us when COVID hit in Uganda, for example. I received telephone calls throughout the day, throughout the night, from families that didn't have food, from women who couldn't provide sanitary pads for their daughters, from girls that had to sell themselves for pads, sex for pads. So because we are on the ground, we can't get away from this. Plus, it is our passion and we love what we do. So back to the question. What are some of the good practices? I think the first good practice that I want to mention here is the Innovative Peace Fund by ICANN. This is a very flexible fund that can be accessed by organizations that are working at the national level, but even by smaller organizations that are working in subnational communities and at village level. That is good practice because the way it is structured, it is so easy to feel that template. The template is easy to understand. But in addition to that, before any cycle of funding, I can make sure that they take the applicant through the template and they make sure that the applicant understands the template, including the M&E framework, and they go with you along the way to fill in. You explain what you want to achieve. They enable you to learn what an objective should look like. That is good practice because it integrates capacity building of the grantee, and that is important to us. The other fund that I would like to recommend is what we receive from the Urgent Action Fund for Africa that integrates rapid response for women's human rights work. In cases where we have had to evacuate women peace builders from dangerous situations, you apply to Urgent Action Fund Africa. They have a template that is only 3 pages long. You fill it in and they will give you a call and go through it with you to ask you questions to understand it better. After that call, within 5 days, you receive the fund and then you evacuate women that are in danger. We have been able to evacuate young women that were involved in political campaigning of opposition leaders, and we were able to evacuate them using that particular fund. That is good practice. It does not mean that these are funds that are given without accountability. No, we account for this money very thoroughly because women peace builders at the grassroots are very good with money, and we are able to stretch this shilling. We were in a European Union meeting last week, and I was talking about what we have achieved with the fund we got from Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. And this delegate from the European Union asked me, how are you able to do so much with so little money? But that is what we do. Women peace builders. Those are some very good practices. The other fund that I would like to recommend is what the Africa Women's Development Fund does. What I'm talking about is that we have these women's funds. They are delegated women's funds that understand women's needs, that integrate capacity building, that respect the local realities on the ground and address the needs of women peace builders. And therefore, they are able to respond. They respond in a timely manner, but they also respond in a respectful manner. Those are funds that help us. They may not be huge funds, but they help us go a long way, and we know that we are respected. Now, on the other hand, we also, as a country, Uganda, we had a very good process of developing our third national action plan, NAP3, which was launched in March. This time round, because of the advocacy work that we have done since our first NAP in 2008, we, women in civil society, took the lead in the design of that national action plan. And I was actually the national consultant. So the design was very inclusive and the role of civil society is specified. So some of the things that we have been recommending since we started monitoring implementation of 1325 in 2010, Mavic would remember, was that Uganda should have a basket fund for the NAP, was that Uganda should have an M&E framework for the NAP, was that Uganda would have a coordination mechanism for the NAP. It has taken this long, but in 2021, we have a NAP that is costed, that has an M&E framework, that has a communication plan, and that has a coordination committee all the way from national level up to the sub-national level. And because we have been involved in this, we have now, the government and UN Women have established a basket fund which all the donors are contributing to, and different women's groups can apply to this fund and access it just as much as women's agencies, as government agencies.
Thank you. Thank you, Robina, and we'll come back to you on the efficacy of the new basket fund. I'm conscious of time, but thank you so much for those recommendations, Robina. And I'm going to move to our colleague from Germany. You jump around in my Zoom box, but Suzanne Giesgeier from the German mission, and your thoughts both on what you're hearing right now, but also Germany made a commitment to supporting women's peacebuilding work in its latest NAP. What exactly are you going to be doing? What are the priorities? And given what you've heard right now around good practices and funding and so timelines and making things easier, what lessons do you think you can take from what you're hearing today to move forward? Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
So thank you very much, and excellencies and dear colleagues and friends, and it's so nice for me to see so many familiar faces. So I'm the new director for humanitarian assistance in the German Foreign Office. So, and I wanted to start with a quote. So a very wise woman once said, "Peace is too important to be left alone to man." So, and now we are, and it's 21 years after 3025 was adopted. So as you said, the question should not longer be whether we need women to achieve peace, but how exactly we can empower them and to take part in all stages of the decision-making process. So as you said, I would like to share some ways in which Germany works to promote gender equality in peace building. So the first thing is, as it was discussed, there is the need to directly fund women-led organizations on the ground. And the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund is, in our opinion, a unique instrument to strengthen women's organizations and female leadership through concrete projects. And I'm very glad that our colleague from Cameroon mentioned one of these joint successful projects that we have together. So Germany is one of the major contributors to this fund and has so far contributed 10.1 million euros. And we are also proud to repeat the pledge that we will provide another 5 million euro to support the fund's work in Afghanistan, in Lebanon and Sudan. So, but it's not only the commitment, the financial commitment to the fund, we are also honored that we are part of the funding board. And we actively participate in shaping this work institutionally and on the ground. So it's, in our opinion, a most responsive international mechanism to tackle emerging challenges. And as we have seen during the COVID-19 crisis, the emergency response window has proven once again that it was quick and responsive and one of the most promising way of impactful financing, and especially during crisis. That brings me to my second point. So as it was said, we need innovative financing and as the colleague from Uganda said, also anticipatory funding. So, and Germany is one of the largest donors of the Peacebuilding Fund, and we are strongly committed to the Secretary General's Sustaining Peace agenda. And so we are exploring innovative options in order to achieve exactly the quantum leap that you mentioned, which is really necessary to finance peace building. And the PBF has a priority window. It's called Fostering Inclusion Through Women and Youth Empowerment. And in our opinion, this has played an important role. So, and my third and last point is really we have to strengthen alliances between states, civil society actors, and to make sure that we really translate the women, peace and security agenda into practice and into action. And this is why the Women, Peace, Security and Humanitarian Action Compact comes into play. So we are very proud to serve as a catalytic member to this compact. And we collaborate with government, civil society organizations, the UN and others to actually push for a better implementation. And this, of course, includes also financing. And this is also in line with our National Action Plan, which we have on 1325. And this is continues to guide our strong political commitment to the WPS agenda. So we believe it is really crucial, as I said, to support women peace builders, women human rights defenders, and women-led organizations. So to summarize, from dedicated funding to innovative financing to forming alliances, Germany remains really an active partner in funding gender equality and peace building. So this is why we very much welcome the event, and we thanks again to the organizers for providing this space and sharing the best practice examples. And we really listened carefully, and I think it was a very good exchange of views, and we are really proud to be one of the active members of this group. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and my apologies to our co-hosts, the mission of Ireland, for letting Germany jump the queue. But I thank you for your patience. I'm going to hand the floor over to Ambassador Buenrostro. You have no idea how kind of comforting it is to know that you are on the Security Council these days. So we all cheer you as with every instance that comes up. Ambassador Buenrostro, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I'll tell you, I'm in a bit of a rush now because we do actually have a Security Council meeting this morning. Those of us on the Council obviously have this issue at the heart of our work. So I will be relatively brief in view of the time. Of course, a very important conversation this morning, and I'm glad I've been listening for the last hour to the really excellent experiences of our colleagues who spoke, Abir from Syria, Justine in Cameroon, and Robina, of course, whom we know from Uganda. You all showed in your very powerful remarks, really, to me, just what can be achieved when money gets to the right place, when it gets to the right people. And by that, I mean, of course, women peace builders. I think your testimonies today really show us, frankly, what the world could be like. It could be a different and certainly a better place, if only, as the Secretary General himself says, that welfare was privileged over warfare. We've heard, of course, in the remarks today, time and again, we hear it at the Council, shockingly, 0.2% of the total bilateral global aid reaches fragile countries, goes directly to women's organizations. And this is something that absolutely we want to see change. It clearly leaves a very serious gap, in our view, between the stated political will and sometimes the rhetoric and the actual provision of capacity to women peace builders on the ground to get on with the job in exactly the way we've heard this morning. Rhetoric alone won't build peace. We all know that. There are clearly some practical issues as well for donors in channeling funding right to grassroots and to small scale organizations. And that's why mechanisms like the Women Peace and Humanitarian Fund and the Peacebuilding Fund play such critical roles in bridge building right to the women who are getting the job done on the ground, and we need more of that. Ireland has recently made a 5-year pledge of $1.5 million to the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund for precisely that reason, to directly get the money to support the people, the women who are doing the work on the ground. We're also a long-standing contributor to the UN Peacebuilding Fund, which importantly allocates 40% of its overall investment to support gender equality and women's empowerment. And we're also proud to be a board member of the WPS, the Humanitarian Action Compact, which prioritizes direct assistance to local women's organizations. So look, fact is, funding for women peace builders is a central component of peace building financing. Doing it well means that we need to listen to what peace builders need, and above all, to heed them. That's why last year with the UN Women and GNWP, Ireland conducted a study on grassroots women peace builders so we could better understand the day-to-day realities and the needs. And we're really delighted to have heard from one of the participants in that study just before I came on, Robina. For our firm view now is that we need to step up political will on financing. Throughout Ireland's Security Council membership, we're now going into our 11th month on the Council. We have championed the WPS agenda. We amplify daily the voices of women leaders, women peace builders, and we work to bring a gender perspective to everything the Council does. We've demonstrated this, I think, as co-chair of the informal expert group on WPS. And recently, we're now in the 3rd month of a WPS trio from Ireland through Kenya to Mexico. As we approach the high-level meeting on financing for peace builders, we're ready to support all the efforts we can make to ensure that focuses on making sure that women peace builders are high on the agenda. And we will say to close, sometimes talk about women, peace and security can be cheap. Our rhetoric has to be matched by our decisions and by our actions on how we spend money. So thanks again for giving me the floor, and I'll apologize that I have to run right across the road to the Security Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Renaison, and a huge thank you for allowing us to switch the agenda around a little bit for our German colleague. One point that I want to make for everybody is that we've heard from our partners on the ground that there are different modalities, and the independent funds are really critical. So the question of the gap again between the non-governmental funding that comes to our partners versus the state and multilateral funding that comes, and what are the challenges that we have, or how do we bridge that gap? I think this is really critical. As GPAC, I think it was we heard that it was GPAC with German funding that helped our colleagues in Cameroon. I'm going to move on to our next speaker, and it is our colleagues from yes, I'm seeing some hands raised, which we will come to as well. But our next speaker is Ambassador Alicia Buenrostro, Deputy Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of Mexico, and of course, another co-host of this event. The floor is yours. And I'm seeing, oh, there you are. Okay, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this very important and timely meeting. Mexico, of course, is very proud to be partnering this event with UN Women, with civil society organizations and other member states that are committed with the rights of all women and girls around the world. My country, Mexico, also in line with its feminist foreign policy and as co-chair of the informal expert group on WPS at the Security Council, has launched with Ireland and Kenya the presidency trio for WPS that has been referred to by the Ambassador of Ireland. And this is because we're determined to advance the implementation of the agenda, which includes not only Security Council Resolution 1325, but all the others subsequent. So to achieve the level of progress our world desperately needs towards peaceful and inclusive societies, women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in peace-building processes, and that must be ensured. However, if we don't increase direct and flexible financing for women peace builders and women-led organizations, we are merely playing lip service. And this is not only a question of economic resources, but rather involves transformative changes in institutional culture. Local women peace builders and women-led organizations know the specific situation and needs on the ground and are often the first line respondents at any given crisis that erupts in their communities. However, they cannot carry out their work effectively if funding remains insufficient, unpredictable, or inflexible. So some concrete steps have been taken in the right direction. For example, the Generation Equality Forum that was hosted by Mexico and France a few months ago collected over $40 billion. And that is a lot of money, $40 billion in ambitious commitments to support feminist investments and key actions to gender equality in the next 5 years by governments, by civil society organizations, and the private sector. And within this frame, my country, as a member of the Compact on WPS and Humanitarian Action, will work to achieve the goal of promoting financing of the WPS agenda and gender equality in humanitarian programming. Several mechanisms have channeled already financing to women peace builder organizations in conflict-affected settings. It has already been mentioned here in this meeting, the Peacebuilding Fund, the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund, and other independent civil society-led and multi-donor initiatives that offer grants of different size. However, it is clear that this has not been enough, and women-led peace-building organizations can no longer wait. So basically, the failure to allocate sufficient resources and funds for their work has been one of the most important obstacles to the implementation of the WPS commitments over the past 21 years. And that is the reality. So stronger coordination is also needed to allow relevant platforms, partners, and donors to strengthen synergies while avoiding duplications to address the funding gap for the implementation of the WPS agenda. So the high-level fund that has already been mentioned here, the high-level meeting on financing for development will also be an opportunity to address this issue and to put forward our messages. Stronger coordination, as I said, is needed to allow relevant platforms, partners, and donors to strengthen synergies while avoiding duplications to address the funding gap for the implementation of the WPS agenda. So count with my country to continue advocating for and working towards these crucial goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Buenrostro. I'm going to move very quickly to our colleague from Canada, Krista House. And Krista, I have a very simple question for you. Canada was one of the leading member states to basically enable flexible funding during COVID, which has had enormous positive impact. And I think we're going to hear from some of our colleagues later. Are you planning on keeping this policy going forward, both in terms of the WPHF and in terms of the independent funding that you do to organizations like ICANN? Is that something that has been a good lesson for the last year or so? And if not, why not? If so, why you would encourage others to do the same? Thank you.
Thank you, Sanam, and good morning and good evening and good afternoon to everyone. A special thank you to the organizers and GNWP, GPAC, ICANN, Convena to Convena, and UN Women for co-hosting this event. I think the pandemic has highlighted the need for supporters of women peace builders to roll up our collective sleeves and make the ambitious but necessary changes to become more effective peace builders, and more importantly, to listen to women peace builders. As the Canadian Ambassador for Women, Peace and Security, Jacqueline O'Neill, said at the Security Council open debate last month on women, peace and security, women don't need to be given a voice. They have voices and we must listen to them. And so in listening to the women peace builders over the past year in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, we heard a number of things. The need for flexible, multi-year programmatic funding that's responsive and sustainable, and institutional funding that is critical for the sustainable impact and support to women's movements. We've also heard some really important specific things that are needed to put forward those recommendations. More direct access to donor funding, longer project durations, the need to include protection and security elements in programs, and to provide training on cyber protection, cyber hygiene, and cyber awareness. Because we know that a lot of the events have moved to a virtual space, and the reliance on virtual space in the context of the pandemic has proved to be critically important, but also critically vulnerable as well to attacks to women. We know that the barriers to women's participation are structural and originate in the multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and violence. And these have been exacerbated in conflict, but even more so in the pandemic. And so as COVID increased the need for online engagements, so too did instances of cyber hate, intimidation, and online threats. And so as a donor, we're constantly looking at the structure of our projects and agreements to allow greater flexibility to support women peace builders and to help them navigate these new spaces. We've also increasingly provided support and resources for psychosocial and emotional support in projects, which are often overlooked. We have also looked at the structure of our projects and agreements to allow for greater time periods. And so as a result, Canada's commitment to women peace builders, along with our ongoing programming, is helping to address protection, technical training and capacity building, and advocacy needs to better serve women negotiators, mediators, and peace builders in the current pandemic reality. So as many others have mentioned, we as Canada support ICANN, WILF, GNWP, the Peacebuilding Fund, and the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. And through this support, Canada is working to ensure women peace builders continue to receive support during and after the pandemic. So I think we've all heard about the ongoing crisis in Afghanistan, as well as the evolving conflict in Ethiopia. These are all litmus tests to our commitments to implementing Resolution 1325 and all subsequent resolutions on WPS, but also to really listen to the women who are the recipients of a lot of the violence right now in these two countries, and to support them in a meaningful way going forward. And I think as donors, we commit to continually assessing our programming to ensure that it's fit for purpose and that it's constantly meeting the needs of these women peace builders. And so we must continue to answer the call of the women peace builders to listen. And to do so, we must collectively work together to ensure that financing the crucial work of women peace builders continues in spite of and despite the current pandemic landscape. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come to my our colleague Visakha Dharmadasa from the Association of War Affected Women in Sri Lanka as just as a follow-up to Krista. Visakha, you have been at the receiving end, if you want, of not only the funding, which is maybe the kind of the thing that oils the wheels, but actually doing the work, what it meant to be trying to do reconciliation in the aftermath of your war, the bombings that happened, and then COVID on top of it. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of what you've done with flexible funding, and if you have any questions for the panel, and then I'll come to our colleague Anne Burns from Sweden as a follow-up. So we're just moving along, and I see the other hands.
Thank you very much, Sanam. And yes, really want to tell especially about the flexible funding. Right now, and everybody knows that Sri Lanka has a stubborn government, and we were able to shift a bit them towards peace and reconciliation. And that's why the president, even when he met the General Secretary of the United Nations, told that he's ready to speak with the diaspora of Tamil diaspora. That happened because of the fact that I want to thank France and Maya, because I mean, we didn't have an activity even to bring the key civil society actors, but because of COVID and we couldn't do one activity which we had in the proposal, I asked and said, can I shift it? And that flexibility really enabled us. And I even didn't imagine that we could build this relationship with the government of Sri Lanka. I mean, this particular government, which is in office right now, and also slowly shift them. We are in touch with them and trying to shift. And also one thing before I stop, I want to tell, when we went to the jungle to meet the Tamil tigers 20 years ago, Norway gave us 5,000 kroners. Very little maybe, but that enabled us to broker the ceasefire. So never underestimate the ability of women peace builders at the ground. Even with very little money, they can do wonders. So as always, especially I also want to mention GPAC here and Maya, because rely on us as well, understand and also respect our knowledge. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Visakha. I'm going to come back to you with a question afterwards, but Anne Burns, please, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Sweden, in charge of the WPS agenda there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanam. It's an honor to be with you, and thank you so much to you and the other organizers for convening us around this very timely issue, and also in connection to the high-level meeting. So it's so crucial to connect these dots and to bring this agenda into that meeting. And has been said, too much time and too many years have been focused on the why of women's participation in peace processes, and it's long overdue to focus on the how. Financing is certainly an integral area to focus on in this regard, and not only the amounts but also the how we do it. And that is really why we welcome so much that you pinpointed this issue, and also, prepared the background paper, which really points to key issues to address in this respect. Sadly, as we've touched upon, adequate financing for prevention and peace building overall remains a key challenge. And the picture, as we know, becomes even more bleak when we look at what really come to gender responsive peacebuilding financing. So much more needs to be done to ensure sufficient, predictable, sustainable, and adequate funding. And to meet all these and other challenges that are very much linked to how we've been doing things so far, and very much linked to the structures that we have, is, behind that is the reason for Sweden having a feminist government and a feminist foreign policy. Mexico has touched upon it. For us, when we started with it in 2014 as the first country, we have seen that this has really changed our mindset and our way of working. And I cannot recommend it enough. It's such a change, to change approach and to have this with you in everything you do, that really changes things and makes your work become gender responsive and makes you in another way pay attention to the situation and rights of women and girls, and to push for their inclusion in both financial and political decision making. And in our feminist foreign policy, also mentioned also by Canada, of course, we emphasize 3 R's: rights, representation, and resources. So resources is with us all the time. And this has really helped us to, in concrete terms, to increase the numbers they were already there, because we've been working on gender equality and WPS for ages, but we've seen a substantial increase. 0.2 has been mentioned. We are well above 2.0, and we're increasing still. So we really see that this can really be recommended as a tool to have this approach in everything mainstreamed. And as targeted approach in this, we've really looked at women's rights organizations, women peace builders and their organizations. And we have seen that these figures have also jumped. One tool we've used is, in parallel to the bilateral strategies we have, the engagement we have in multilateral organizations, we've added a strategic thematic strategy on gender equality within the architecture of CEDA. And we pinpointed in that strategy women's rights organizations, as we saw that this was something that lacked funding. And we've seen that this strategy has helped us, has become a lever for us. And we have also seen in the COVID-19 situation how we've been able to rely on the dialogue and the network that we've had with these actors, how they in turn have been able to redirect our flexible funds, which is also a key point, to what has been urgently needed to do, in this new situation. So I would say that another tool that is present with us is the need for flexible funding, core funding, not project funding. And this is also something that we've been able to use in the feminist foreign policy aspect. So systematic, structural, strategic approach with this gender mainstreaming approach all the time, which is sort of also something that we see in the whole government offices, not only in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So that is also key, to make your Minister for Finance thinking these terms. That is what really changes things, and get us outside our family of already convinced souls. We have to get out of our own room and get into others. And that is what brings you over to the peace building field, because it's so important that you raise this issue now, going up to the heading up to the high level meeting. And from Sweden's side, we have an initiative called Good Peacebuilding Financing that aims at responding to the growing need for financial resources to peace building. And this also includes focus on women peace building or women peace builders. And it includes mobilizing for increasing volumes, including but not limited to the UN Peacebuilding Fund, and also, again, to make this long-term predictable and flexible. It also includes improving cooperation acquired approaches, which has been mentioned within and between donors, but also in with the overall UN system, the EU, IFIs, not least the World Bank, has to have the same kind of long-term approach. And in this, women peace builders and human rights defenders are crucial. Sanam, you pointed to the issue of public-private links and whether we can do anything structural and systematic about that. And I think that, which has been mentioned, the generation equality, umbrella and the action coalitions, looking at feminist leadership, looking at the WPS within the compact, that is a new mechanism that also includes private actors, and hopefully, and that is really what we hope for, we can get very many new good ideas out of that. And also a possibility of reaching new audiences and new groups to convince. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to raise a really uncomfortable truth for everybody here, all 127 of us. We found that the feminist funding, kind of the big things like Co-Impact and others, when we've asked them about funding for women peace builders in fragile contexts, there wasn't that much of an appetite. At least that was the case 3 months ago. So my question to our government colleagues is, where do you see your role in bringing the private sector, and not just those, because of course there are many priorities, and we shouldn't be just expecting women to fund other women, but where do you see, and how can we work with you? We have a lot of ideas around how to bring the private sector, the philanthropists, companies, etc., into the space to talk with women, because this is something that is completely lacking, and we can't keep sort of saying, okay, we're going to do private sector, but actually not really bring in the role and work of independent funds, independent women's funds, and others that have been set up for this purpose. So that's something maybe we could talk about later. I'm going to go on to our two colleagues who had their hands up and been very patient. Nina Lahoud first, and then Oksana Potapova. Nina, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Can you?
Nina, we just lost you again. Can you unmute?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And thanks for this provocative discussion. We've heard from many about the need for increased access by the hardworking, committed CSOs on the ground to access a greater percentage of donor funding, and also trying to access dedicated funds such as the Peacebuilding Support Fund, which has really been in the lead for a long time, and the Peace and Security Humanitarian Fund. But one area I wanted to flip the lens a bit and look inward and recall two things that have happened in the UN that perhaps, I'll be devil's advocate, could maybe is deserving of more scrutiny. One is the groundbreaking at the time in 2010, the Women in Peace Building report that went to the Security Council, which in those days was really the first of its kind, and put out the recommendation for 15% of all UN entities allocating funding for women's needs in the field. Again, the Peacebuilding Support Office always ranks near the top on that, and I see that my colleague is on the screen, but it really didn't get dissected in terms of the obligations of others, and peacekeeping operations pushed back on it some. And the second, and therefore, I think that we've sort of left that very important report that I think is still one of the most substantive, with many recommendations, including looking inward at the UN and what the UN can do, drifting out there. So that's one thing I wanted to flag that would perhaps be revisited. The second thing, in full being open, the SG's high-level task force on financing for gender equality that was set up in 2018, full transparency, I was appointed as one of the civil society representatives on the advisory group. And for those that have read the feminist campaign report cards and all, you'll see that it hasn't been publicly released. I'm not quite sure why that is, but I think we tried very hard from the advisory group to put forth a lot of recommendations, and there's a lot of focus on gender markers to sort of push UN entities, both at headquarters and the field, to integrate gender equality and allocating funds for that purpose. One could ask the question, within even those any allocations made by UN entities, could one envisage that there could be an obligatory percentage for supporting women's entities, not just for holding meetings with organizations, joint meetings, and this and that one-off things, but actually go that far, given that we all acknowledge that there's no one doing more in these touchy situations than the CSOs in the field, the women piece on the front line. So that's the second thing I wanted to flag, because I think we put a lot of work into it. And I think, civil society is a core part of it. So I just wanted to put those two things, looking more inward, that we don't always have to look to donors and say, you've got to do more. I think all of this is great, but what about inward and making the UN deliver on some of those commitments? Thank you.
Nina, thank you very much for those comments. And it actually, I think it points to a very important issue that when we're talking about crisis, when we're talking about political situations, is funding of local women's organizations through the UN necessarily the best, quickest way? A, because of the politics of these contexts, and B, because of the time frame that it might take for some of the administrative things. And the politics is important because certainly in the past, member states would need to know if money was going to their, was at least be alerted that potentially money was going to a local NGO in their context. So if you're dealing with internal crises, is there some kind of challenges that we have there? And that's why these independent non-governmental funds have come about and exist. So I think it's important to be looking at how to streamline the UN side, but also how to go outside the UN system for these federal contexts as well. I'm going to hand the floor to Oksana Potapova. Thank you for your patience.
Greetings, everyone. Can you hear me? And is my camera on? Perfect. Thank you, Sanam, for giving me this space. It's great to be here and great to see a lot of familiar faces. And thank you, everyone, for the work that you continue to be doing. I will try to be brief, and I want to add a point that I've also included in the chat, which comes from both my positionality as a long-term peace activist in Ukraine and a recent scholar in gender, peace, and security at the LSE. It is my program that actually helped me understand the importance of positionality and how much an embodied lived experience actually informs understanding and knowledge of policies and politics. So one of the issues I want to bring up, which I also realize is difficult to articulate in words that don't victimize us as peace builders in the global arena, is the issue of precarity and holistic security of women peace builders. And what I mean is the toll it takes in the long run on someone who is involved in continuous crisis management in a situation of ongoing insecurity. And living in a country that is not at war for the last year has helped me realize how different it is even on my body and on my psyche to be in a different context. And I don't think that programs that fund women's organizations or movements, even feminist ones, take that into account, because most of them are still directed towards activities and outputs, which is understandable. We need to report, we need to show that we are efficient. But the more I look at actually researching feminist funding principles, which is the interest of my research, and actually grassroots kind of global South voices in this global infrastructure, the more we talk about the importance of process, not only results as a feminist approach, right? And the importance of understanding embodied impacts of resource management. Feminist funding and feminist work is very material. And we often forget about the material impacts this work has on us, not only on our communities. So my question is, do you think it makes sense to place this issue on a higher level, on the structural level, and how would we be able to phrase it without actually just saying, oh, we're so tired, we're burning out, just give us money for, trauma response. It's not that. It's not immediate or short-term or one-time security evacuation funding or a trauma workshop. It's a change of a logic of resourcing and how the resources are distributed and allocated, with a lot more focus on the agency and the ownership of local organizations. And I don't see this happening. And I want to kind of bring this to you to hopefully have that conversation further. Thank you so much.
Oksana, thank you so much for bringing this up. I've been in this business for 25 years, and I call it now, especially with Afghanistan, what we're seeing is the privatization of responsibility. That we in the civil society sector are sitting in a space where we have all of the responsibility and the risk and to ourselves, to our organizations and so forth, but none of the benefits of being in the private sector, meaning none of the financing or the salaries, nor any of the benefits of being in the public sector. I look at my colleagues around the world and I'm like, who has a pension? Who has healthcare support? Who has all of these issues? And there's the mental and the physical healthcare. And that question of saying, these are unbelievable, I don't even want to monetize to say resource. This is extraordinary social sort of capital, if you want, that exists on the ground. And if it disappears, it's very hard to replace. And yet we need to enable it to foster and nurture itself. And we're not really doing anything. We're just sort of shredding people or stretching people to their maximum. So thank you for bringing that. And I do think it's an important area to go. I'm going to move on to our last and final speaker to close off the discussion. Petra Torterman from our colleagues at, hold on one second, at Kavina till Kavina, executive director. And Kavina's been in this business for a long time, Petra. So please, any final concluding remarks and thoughts for us to take on to the next round of, I hope next round of conversations, but certainly there'll be findings from this discussion that we will share with everyone.
Thank you very much, Sanam, and a big thank you to all of you who have contributed with your expertise and knowledge here today. And I think today what we have been doing, one of the things we've been doing is repeated what we all already know, that women peace builders do amazing work with extremely limited resources that take huge effort for them to access. And I would also like to stress what was just brought up by Oksana, and that also Kvinna till Kvinna is confirming in a newly conducted study, is the hate and the threats that come to women peace builders. And in this study we've just done, looking at from many, many countries, 74 countries, respondents, we could see that in some regions of the world, in Northeast Europe and in Latin America, for example, working with peace building, reconciliation, and working across borders is ranked as extremely high risks, which, as you just mentioned, Oksana, not only affects the individual peace builders, but also their families, and of course, in the long run, society in itself. And that, I think, is just, as any reason, a good enough reason to support women peace builders. But I also think the conversations today have pointed out very clearly the complexity of women's participation in peace building. And we need to see change all the way from the basic that women can handle a budget, as our colleagues from Syria and Uganda said, but also to the first intervention from Anita Bahita, that we should see ODA as a catalytic funding, which can leverage private funding for peace building. It's a very broad area that we need to talk and that we need to be involved with. And I'm very happy that Kvinna till Kvinna is part of this coalition of organizations that have really joined forces to show that there's really no excuse not to fund women-led peacebuilding work, and that we have best practices, we have good examples, we have innovative modalities, and we have created processes to get effective and sustainable funding out there. So I think an important thing to do for us is to break down the silos. We should not be having this conversation separate from the billions that are being decided upon at the COP26 in Glasgow at the moment, or at the big humanitarian conferences. We need the gender perspective and the women, peace and security perspective to be present there just as much as it is during the so-called 1325 week. We really need to move the needles and bring women peace builders the resources they deserve.
And I also think that we should, look more into breaking the silos between the different parts of the international community. This summer, the OECD DAC adopted their recommendations on enabling civil society in development cooperation and humanitarian assistance, with specific recommendations on dialogue, on modules on financing, partnership based on trust, and the importance of supporting civil society in its own rights. All issues that have been put forward here today, and I think these recommendations could be used for peace building as well. So to sum it up, I think with coalitions like the organizations and member states that have participated here today, we have great opportunity to advance our efforts in reaching beyond the usual suspects to make fair and well-deserved and effective investments in women-led sustainable work for peace. And of course, we are looking forward to be part on the discussions before and during, and we know it's going to be after the high-level meeting on financing for peace building in 2022. So thank you very much, and a big thank you to you, Sanam, for leading us so eloquently through today's discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We are 3 minutes over time, so forgive me for the overtime, but I hope that this was a useful conversation. Again, I want to just emphasize the importance of the independent funds, along with the UN funds, and the multiplicity of ways that we need to get money to the ground. The issue is to get it into the right hands at the right time without overburdening people. We know how to do it, and we should think big. These days, when people are earning $100 million a minute, it really shouldn't be that much for us to think about for many, many years of peace work on the ground. So let's imagine it and let's build it together. And I look forward to our next round of conversations, and certainly being at the high-level event collectively on the main stage. Have a great rest of the week and rest of the day. Again, I want to thank our partners, GPAC, GNWP, Mexico, Ireland, Kavina, Madre, Wilf, anybody that I didn't mention, and everybody who did speak and was patient in being with us. Have a wonderful week and see you soon. And the paper will be out tomorrow, so please share it widely with everyone as you go forward. Thank you.